From Paris's battered walls, a shout rises as bayonets gleam in the snow. Buzenval is the final charge, and the city's soul hangs in the balance. Paris shivered under a leaden sky, its streets silent save for the distant thud of Prussian shells. It was mid-January 1871, and General Louis Trochu stood atop a rampart near the city's western edge, his cloak dusted with snow as he peered into the haze. For months of siege had hollowed the capital. Bread reduced to sawdust rations, the Seine frozen beneath a crust of ice, the faces of its people gaunt with hunger. His National Guard, 90,000 strong, manned the walls, their mismatched uniforms a patchwork of defiance. Le Mans had fallen, Chanzy's army was dust, and now Paris stood alone. Trochu gripped the rampart's edge, his breath steaming in the frigid air. "We break out," he told his aide, his voice firm despite the weariness etching his face. "Buzenval Park, westward. It's our last chance." The provisional government, holed up in the Hôtel de Ville, pressed him daily, relieve the siege. Rally France. Sedan's echo, Bazaine's surrender, and Le Mans' rout had stripped their options bare. His plan was a desperate thrust: punch through Moltke's lines, link with scattered forces, breathe life into the Republic. "Ready the men," he ordered. "We strike at dawn." Beyond the walls, Prussian King Wilhelm I sat in a commandeered villa near Versailles, his silver hair glinting in the firelight as he reviewed Moltke's latest dispatch. The siege ringed Paris tight. 40,000 Prussian troops under Prince Frederick Charles, their artillery pounding the city day and night. Le Mans' collapse had sealed the West. Now, only Paris's stubborn pulse remained. "They'll try something," Wilhelm said, his tone heavy with certainty. "Trochu's not finished." He turned to Moltke, seated nearby, maps spread before him. "Strengthen the West, let them come." General Helmuth von Moltke nodded, his gray eyes tracing the lines encircling Paris. Buzenval Park, a wooded rise west of the city, loomed as the likely flashpoint. "They'll sortie," he agreed, his voice a low rasp. "And we'll crush them." His strategy was unyielding. Let the French exhaust themselves against his defenses, trenches deep, guns primed, then tighten the noose. "Reinforce the park," he instructed his aide. "Double the cannon." Sedan had broken their spine, Le Mans their limbs. Paris was the head, and he'd sever it clean. In a chateau nearby, Otto von Bismarck paced, a telegram from Berlin in hand, coronation set. Paris must fall. The siege wore on, but victory shimmered close. Wilhelm's crown, Germany's rise, France's ruin. "Tell Moltke to end it," he growled to his aide, cigar smoke curling from his lips. No more delays. Buzenval would be the final nail, and he savored its approach. Trochu descended the rampart, the snow crunching under his boots, his mind fixed on the dawn. Paris's cry echoed in his ears, a city starving, a republic gasping. Wilhelm adjusted his collar, Moltke sharpened his trap, and Bismarck's ambition burned. The siege tightened, and Buzenval waited. Snow fell in heavy curtains over Paris on January 19th, 1871. The dawn cloaked in a swirling white haze as General Louis Trochu led his National Guard westward. 90,000 men, shopkeepers, students, fathers, marched from the city's battered gates, their bayonets gleaming through the storm. Buzenval Park loomed ahead, a wooded rise beyond the walls, its slopes a faint shadow in the blizzard. Trochu rode at the fore, his cloak sodden, his voice cutting through the wind. "For Paris!" he shouted, spurring them on. This was the final surge, the city's cry made flesh, and the Republic's soul hung in the balance. The Prussian lines waited, 40,000 troops under Prince Frederick Charles entrenched along the park's edge. Their trenches bristled with rifles, cannons hulkied behind earthworks, and the snow masked their dark uniforms. General Helmuth von Moltke had foreseen this, Trochu's desperate lunge, and turned Buzenval into a kill zone. "Let them come," he'd told Frederick Charles the night before, his voice a steel thread. "Break them here." The Krupp guns stood primed, their barrels cold against the frost, a wall of death for Paris's last gasp. The French charged, a ragged tide bursting from the fog, their shouts swallowed by the gale. Trochu's plan was bold, smash through the Prussian west, link with remnants beyond, but the snow slowed them, boots sinking into drifts. At 300 yards, the Prussian guns roared, shells bursting in the air, shredding the front ranks. Shrapnel tore through flesh, snow stained crimson, yet the guard pressed on, driven by hunger and fury. "Forward!" Trochu bellowed, his horse rearing as a shell exploded nearby, the blast ringing in his ears. Frederick Charles watched from a rise, his breath steaming as the French closed. "Hold fire," he ordered, his tone steady, waiting for the range to shrink. At 150 yards, his rifles erupted, a storm of lead that scythed through the guard's center. Men fell in heaps, their bayonets useless against the barrage. Trachu's right flank gained ground, seizing a trench in a flurry of steel, bayonets clashing, screams piercing the wind. But the Prussians rallied, their reserves surging to plug the gap. "Push them back," Frederick Charles barked, sending a battalion crashing into the breach. The park became a cauldron, snow churned to mud, bodies piling in the drifts. Trachu dismounted, saber drawn, leading a charge up the slope. His men followed, their rifles spitting defiance, and for a fleeting moment, the Prussian line wavered, trenches overrun, cannons silenced. "We've got them," he yelled, hope flaring in his chest. But Moltke's trap tightened, artillery shifted, shells raining anew, and Frederick Charles's counterattack struck like a hammer. Prussian bayonets gleamed, driving the French back, their gains dissolving in a tide of blue. The storm thickened, visibility fading to shadows and flashes. Trachu's left collapsed, recruits breaking under the onslaught, fleeing toward Paris's walls. "Rally," he roared, his voice cracking as blood streaked his cheek from a glancing wound. The center held barely, but the Prussians pressed harder, their guns relentless. 4,000 French fell, 1,000 dead in the snow. Frederick Charles advanced, his boots crunching ice, a grim nod signaling the end. "They're spent," he muttered, the rout unfolding. Trachu staggered, the park lost, his men streaming back in disorder. "Retreat," he rasped, the order a knife to his pride. The last surge faltered, 700 Prussian casualties a footnote to France's ruin. Paris's cry faded, the snow swallowing its echo as the city braced for the end. Snow settled over Buzenval Park, a white shroud masking the blood and ruin left by the battle's end on January 19, 1871. General Louis Trachu trudged back through Paris's western gate, his cloak heavy with frost, his saber sheathed in defeat. The National Guard's retreat echoed behind him. 90,000 reduced by 4,000, their shouts of defiance silenced in the drifts. The city's walls loomed, scarred by months of siege, and the air carried the faint stench of smoke and despair. Trachu's chest tightened, his wound throbbing beneath a crude bandage. "We tried," he muttered, his voice a hollow rasp. Inside Paris, the Hôtel de Ville buzzed with panic as Trachu's report reached the provisional government. Buzenval lost. Sortie failed. The room erupted, ministers shouting, fists pounding tables, a mutinous edge sharpening the air. "You've doomed us," a deputy spat, his face flushed with rage. Trachu stood silent, his gaze fixed on a cracked window, snow piling against the glass. The city starved, rats a delicacy, firewood gone, and now its last surge had crumbled. "We hold the walls," he said, the words brittle. "They'll negotiate soon." It was a lie he barely believed, a shield against the mob's fury. Beyond the walls, King Wilhelm I stood in his villa near Versailles, the fire's warmth a stark contrast to the chill outside. Moltke's dispatch lay before him, French repulsed. Losses light. Paris weakens. He adjusted his collar, his silver hair catching the light, and a faint smile broke his stern mask. "They're breaking," he said, his voice steady with certainty. Buzenval's rout was the final crack. Le Mans gone now this. He turned to Moltke, seated nearby, his maps a testament to Prussian triumph. "Tighten the siege," Wilhelm ordered. "End it." General Helmuth von Moltke nodded, his gray eyes glinting as he folded a report. 700 Prussian casualties, a fraction of the French toll. "They've nothing left," he replied, his tone clipped. Buzenval had been a gift. Trachu's sortie bleeding his force dry, the city's spirit fracturing. His artillery pounded Paris day and night, shells arcing over the walls, and now the end loomed. "Increase the bombardment," he told his aide. "They'll yield within days." The trap set at Sedan, honed at Le Mans, closed here, a masterpiece of patience and steel. In a chateau nearby, Otto von Bismarck paced, a cigar smoldering in his hand as he read Moltke's update. 4,000 down, he murmured, exhaling a plume of smoke. "Paris is ours." The city's collapse was imminent. Buzenval the death knell, Wilhelm's coronation the prize. He slammed a fist on the desk, his voice rising. "Tell Moltke to finish it. No mercy." His aide scurried off, the telegraph soon humming with his command. The war's end was a breath away, Germany's dawn breaking over France's dusk. Trachu climbed a rampart, the city's silence pressing against him. Children's cries, distant cannon thuds, the wind's mournful howl. His will buckled, the weight of 4,000 lives a chain around his neck. 9 days, he whispered, counting Paris's last gasp. In Versailles, Wilhelm sipped brandy, Moltke sharpened his maps, and Bismarck's cigar flared, each man tasting victory. The end neared, a shadow falling heavy over the city's cry. Snow drifted through Paris's streets, a ghostly veil over a city on its knees. It was January 28, 1871, 9 days after Buzenval's rout, and a seamstress stood at her window, her thin hands pressed against the frost-rimed glass. The siege's roar had faded, Prussian shells stilled, the air heavy with an eerie quiet. Beyond the walls, Prussian flags rose, their dark shapes stark against the white. Her stomach ached, hollowed by months of starvation, and her eyes traced the empty street. Once alive with carts and laughter, now a tomb for the Republic's cry. The surrender had come that morning, General Louis Trochu's order a whisper through the city. Paris yields. Buzenval's failure, 4,000 lost in the snow, had broken the last thread. The National Guard disbanded, their rifles stacked in defeat, and the provisional government bowed to Moltke's terms. She'd seen the soldiers return, faces gaunt, their defiance drowned in despair. The seamstress pressed a palm to her mouth, stifling a sob, France's heart silenced, its walls breached not by steel but by hunger. In a chateau near Versailles, Otto von Bismarck stood by a fire, its crackle a counterpoint to the stillness outside. A telegram from Moltke rested on the table. Paris surrendered. War's end secured. He lifted a glass of claret, its deep red catching the light, and toasted the air. To Germany, he said, his voice a low rumble of triumph. Buzenval had been the final shove. Trochu's surge crushed, the cities will shattered. Wilhelm's coronation loomed, a crown forged in Paris's fall, and Bismarck savored the taste of victory. The seamstress stepped back, the cold seeping through her worn shawl. Prussian boots echoed faintly beyond the gate, their march a requiem for the siege's end. 700 of theirs fallen at Buzenval, a pittance against France's toll. Moltke's guns stood silent, their work done, while Trochu vanished into the city's shadows, his stand erased. Bismarck drained his glass, the fire's glow dancing in his eyes, and turned to his aide. "Prepare the terms," he ordered. "The treaty seals it." The silence fell, heavy and final, Paris a husk, its cry stilled. The seamstress sank to the floor, the snow outside piling high. In Versailles, Bismarck's fire burned bright, a victor's light against the gloom. The war closed, but its shadow lingered, dark with the promise of terms to come. Spring's faint warmth softened Frankfurt's cobblestones by May 10, 1871, but the Romer's grand hall held the war's lingering chill. Otto von Bismarck loomed at a polished table, his quill cutting through the hush as he signed the Treaty of Frankfurt. Otto von Bismarck, Chancellor, his broad frame a monument to victory. Adolphe Thiers sat across, spectacles slipping, his own signature, Adolphe Thiers, a reluctant mark of capitulation. Paris's surrender on January 28 had shattered France's will. Now this treaty sealed its fate. Alsace and Lorraine ceded to Germany, 5 billion francs demanded as indemnity, Prussian troops to occupy the north until the debt was cleared. "A new dawn," Bismarck rumbled, his voice echoing off the stone, forged in their ruin. In Versailles' opulent chambers, he'd hammered out the terms through February's tense nights, cigar smoke swirling as he pinned a map with a conqueror's certainty. Alsace-Lorraine's coal and iron would fuel Germany's rise, the massive indemnity a yoke to break France's pride, while Wilhelm I's coronation in the Hall of Mirrors on January 18 crowned the triumph in imperial splendor. The war had claimed some 170,000 lives. French soldiers cut down at Grave-Latte, civilians starved in Paris's siege, Prussian blood spilled from Wissembourg onward. But Bismarck saw only the prize. He lifted a claret glass, its crimson glow a victor's salute. "To the Empire," he toasted, the past a stepping stone to power. Thiers, in a Paris office dimmed by shattered hope, had faced the treaty's lash with a diplomat's grit. The hall's ink marked the loss of Alsace-Lorraine. Not lives, but a population of roughly 1.6 million souls, their homes and heritage torn from France's embrace. He'd argued through sleepless weeks, pleading for softer terms, a lighter burden. But Sedan's collapse and Buzenval's desperate snow left him defenseless against Prussia's might. "We signed to survive," he'd whispered to his aide, his voice steady despite the ache, preserving a nation's core amid the wreckage of empire. The occupation loomed, a bitter pill until the last franc was paid, but he clung to a flicker of defiance. A German soldier stood atop an Alsatian hill, spring blossoms brushing his boots as he gazed over the annexed land. The war's thunder, Spitzerin's chaos, Le Mans' rout, had faded into this quiet watch, Prussian banners fluttering over villages once French. He shifted his rifle, the eagle on his helmet catching the sun, and felt the shift. A border redrawn, a nation reshaped, the cost buried in distant fields and city streets. The treaty's weight settled here, a victory rooted in sacrifice, its price a memory of smoke and steel. In a Paris alley, a French child knelt by a wall pocked with shell marks, her small hands tracing the scars of siege. Hunger lingered in her frame, months of scraps and cold, but her spirit burned. Her mother's voice rang in her ears. They stole our east, chained our future. The treaty's terms were a shadow, lands gone, a ransom owed, Prussian boots a lingering specter. She stood, her breath a faint mist in the warming air, and murmured, "I'll take it back someday," her vow a spark against the ashes of defeat. The treaty closed the war's brutal chapter. Germany soared, France stumbled, Europe's balance tilted on a fulcrum of ink and ambition. Bismarck drained his claret in Frankfurt, the hall's applause a hymn to his vision. An empire built on the bones of battle and the spoils of conquest. Thiers departed, the burden of lost lands and a humbled nation heavy on his shoulders, his steps echoing in a city scarred yet enduring. Moltke's guns stood silent, their purpose fulfilled. The soldier patrolled Alsace's frontier, the child harbored her quiet rage, and peace descended, fragile, shadowed by the embers of resentment, a new order rising from the war's smoldering dust.